and have fun and chat.
I think I'm going to launch. Very, very quickly, I think everyone knows what this is all about, but I'd like to welcome you to the second online Penn Wharton wine tasting. The first one was in June, and it was a kind of a little bit of a fun competition, a blind tasting, which means you don't know what the wines are. And it was to try to guess what country a particular wine came from. So we had 6 wines, 3 of each of the same grape variety, and 3 from Italy, 3 from France. So it was like a French/Italy taste-off. And for this seminar, we have the fantastic Zsofi, who is the assistant head somm at 67 Pall Mall, which is a private members club on Pall Mall, kind of next door to the Oxford-Cambridge Club and the Reform Club. And it's the newest club on Pall Mall. It opened in 2014. And it's all about wine. It's basically a place where anybody who loves wine or wants to learn more about it can attend tastings, seminars, discussions, organize their own tastings. It's really a place where I've met some very, very nice people, and it's not all just major wine geeks who are very snobby. It's for anyone who's curious. So I am now just going to hand over to the Penn and Wharton Club folks, Lloyd, Carissa, and Margot, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Good evening to everyone. In my case, it's actually good afternoon, as I'm joining you from the East Coast of the US, where it's sunny and snowy. And my mother, who's also a Penn alumna, where she and I are looking forward to being a little bit naughty by enjoying these treats with you at 1:30 in the afternoon. So most of you know me. My name is Margot Newberger, and I'm the co-president of the Penn Club of the UK, alongside Carissa Gilbert, who is also on this call. I also sit on the Wharton Club of the UK committee, and you'll hear from Lloyd, the president, momentarily. I just wanted to welcome you again and say how thrilled we are that this group managed to come together today instead of our traditional holiday party, which of course we miss very much. Maggie Rosen is a true star alumna for having organized this event and our previous event over the summer, which was such a fun wine tasting. We'd like to extend a huge thank you to Maggie for cheering us up during these times. And I'd also like to wish you, on behalf of the Penn Club and personally, of course, a wonderful, cozy holiday season and a happy and healthy new year. I hope that things will be better in the new year and that we'll be able to gather in person. Of course, I hope enjoy some wine together. And as always, please don't hesitate to contact me and Carissa on any Penn Club matters. And so with that, I'll say cheers and turn it over to Lloyd Thomas briefly, the president of the Wharton Club of the UK, before we get started. Lloyd.
So I'm not going to make a big speech here, particularly as I'm not drinking. So I'm on this just to say hi to everyone, because I thought it would be inappropriate for me to miss a holiday party, and this is very much going to be a holiday party. Is really just because we're at the end of the year. There are a few thank yous that need to be said. The first is to the committee of the Wharton Club, of whom I see a number of you here. There has been so much effort by Wharton alums for Wharton alums, so on everyone's behalf, and people have really worked hard. And I think, if I can just ask everyone to give a big round of applause for the Wharton Club Committee and the Penn Club Exec Board for having done so much work on our behalf. All right. I also would like to thank Margot and Carissa, who took over at the Penn Club, and it's really going from strength to even greater strength. This event is a fantastic collaboration, and we're seeing more and more collaborations between the clubs, which I think is creating synergies, and people are enjoying the events. I really was expecting that we would go into some sort of a hibernation during lockdown, but we've been more active than ever. So the last thank you is to all of you for being such wonderful members of our clubs and being great alums. And from what I see of everyone pulling together to make our own degrees and our status as alumni of the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School more valuable. So thank you to all of you. Here's to a happy and healthy new year and a better year in 2021. Cheers. And now I hand back to you, Maggie.
I'm just very quickly going to hand over to Zsofi because I know everybody is eager to start drinking.
Thank you. And thank you, Lloyd and Carissa and Margot's mom. Welcome. I know it's 1:30 p.m., but you know, it's every time is wine time. So we can have a wine in the morning, lunch, dinner time. You just have to find an excuse for it. You don't even have to find an excuse, just enjoy. And of course, Maggie, thank you so much for helping me organizing this. And I do hope you are going to enjoy the wines. You do know it's going to be on sweet wines and fortified wines. And I hope that you will take something from it and you will learn something from it. Either you're going to learn what you like, what you don't like. And what I always say is that what is the best of this is if you go to a Michelin-star restaurant, hopefully eventually, you go there and you say, I'd like to have a bottle of 1989 Cercia from D'Oliveira's. And if you do that, they are going to be amazed by you. And then they might give you a glass of champagne at the end or a glass of sweet wine. And they are just because they might think you're a Michelin inspector and they are going to even give you extra attention. So feel free to fancy up your word of wine and let's start the webinar. So as I said before, it's going to be on fortified wines and sweet wines, and we are going to go one by one. Sometimes I do side by side, but in this case, I think it's very important to understand different styles, different wines, different fortified wines and things like that, and understand regions where they're coming from. I know that you are muted and you are muted yourself, but anytime you'd like to speak on because you have a comment to make, because you smell something that's so exciting or so bad or whatever, and you'd like to share and you like to understand why is it like that, please unmute yourself. There's no wrong or right. There's no bad or wrong question. So I'm always happy to help you out in any ways. So firstly, we're going to go through on how to make sweet wine, because oftentimes people think that that just because it's got sweetness, it might be sweet wine. And sometimes it's not always true. Firstly, secondly, there's some fake sweet wines out there, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But basically, sweet wine is made out of with natural sweetness, with moutage and botrytis. And I will get into that a little bit just now. So natural sweetness means that the grapes are left on the vine for a bit longer, so they concentrate a bit more. So they have a bit more sugar level, lower acidity and things like that. So when you press it and you ferment it, it's going to be naturally more sweet than the wines that are harvested much earlier. Imagine just an apple. If you take the apple later off the tree, it's going to be just more ripe. And if you take it before it is ripened up, it's going to be less ripe, so more tart. And that's the case with the grapes as well. Usually they harvest around September, but sweet wines, oftentimes, if it's naturally sweet wines, are harvested in August. I mean, depends where you are. In Santorini, usually August, but other places could be up to even October and November, just to make natural sweet wines. And it can also be made by drying grapes on straw mats in lofts and places like that. So they raisinate not on the vine, but outside of the vine in lofts or on the floor under the sun. So then you're going to have natural wines, naturally sweet wines. Or you can do moutage, which means that while you're fermenting the grape, you add additional alcohol to it. But the alcohol is most of the times it's just fortified grape must. So it's going to be still wine, but fortified. And if you add it to a fermenting must, depending on when you add it, if you do it at the very beginning, it's going to be very sweet. If you do it in the middle of the fermentation, it's medium sweet. If you do it at the end, it might be even dry and a bit of residual sugar being left in the wine. So there's another way called moutage. And there's botrytis. This is actually a grape from Hungary, from one of the Furmint grapes. And those little things on it is basically a fungus that affects the grapes, and it almost like soaks all the juice out from the middle of the grape, concentrating the sugar and the flavor. And around the grape, you will see this mossy kind of thing. Well, that's botrytis. So botrytis sweet wine can be made, and these are left on the vines later on. So that's another way to make naturally sweet wines other than fake wines. But there's fake sweet wines, I would say. I'm not saying they're horrible, but if you do add sugar, it's not, is it something that you'd like to drink? It's like drinking Coca-Cola. And I know maybe some of you like Coca-Cola. I love Coca-Cola sometimes, but it's not really natural, is it? It's quite artificial. So you don't really want to drink something that has a kilogram of sugar added to it. And also, oftentimes, I don't know if you heard about ice wines, but ice wine is mostly made in Canada. Outside of Canada, ice wine is also made, which means that the grapes are left on the vine up until sometimes January. So it's basically frozen, and it's super sugary and very concentrated. And that's when they harvest it and they make so-called ice wine from it. And that's what they are famous for. It's a sweet wine. And sometimes people do this. They literally just pick the grapes and then they freeze them, and they press it and they call it ice wine. And that's not very good either. So you might come across with wines like that, but I wouldn't really call them naturally sweet wines. I would probably call them fake sweet wines. And the police department definitely would take them to jail. Anyways, so what is a fortified wine? So fortified wine is basically a wine to which the alcoholic content has been increased by adding spirit. So that's basically called moutage. So the wine retains a so-called sugar level depending on when you add, when you stop, and when you arrest fermentation, depending on where kind of sweetness level you like to get from the wine. That's what is going to happen. And then the way to do it is called moutage. And the sweet wines and the fortified wines, sometimes I take it under one kind of bag, just because some sweet wine is also fortified. And these are the areas where it's from. It is not true that Madeira is always dry, because it's not true. It's actually very wrong, but for some reason, I just still love this picture. So areas where you can get fortified wines from are basically Portugal, Spain, Italy, again, Madeira is in Portugal, of course, France, and of course, Australia. And we are going to cover a few of these wines and few of these style of wines. But before that, so when you do fortification, like I said, you can do before and after. If you do before the wine fortifies, they are the so-called vin de liqueurs, so VDL. And if you are fortifying while the fermentation is, once it started, before it ended, then those are the vin de naturels. And then depending on what style of wine you'd like to make, it might be useful, might be bottled, might be oxidative, might be biologically aged, and might have different sweetness levels. But we are going to get into it in a minute. I'm just going to have to check this one because I forgot the name of that fish. It's bacala, and I remember. So this is basically the Cordioli effect of the basically around the equator. The world is spinning, and it's spinning very, very quickly. So in the North Atlantic Ocean, around this area, you got this Coriolis effect, which means that if you try to sail down from here, from Spain, from Portugal, from even the UK, basically it's impossible to go that way from the east to the west, just because of this effect. So it's going to take you around. And what it says is that all the manufactured goods that you have around Europe that would go down to Africa, and they say around these times when they started to deal with manufactured items, they said there were a lot of slaves that they picked up and basically were working in North America. And then they also had some wine that they took from Madeira over here, over to America. And then they basically sold everything, they let everything go, and then they had an empty ship. And around this place, there's a lot of salmon and cod. So they would pick salmons and cods up, and they would take it back to Europe. And that's why they say in Portugal, you have this local fish, bacala. And the reason why it's salted, because that's how they preserve them on these voyages. So basically, this effect very much affected the whole way of being of these countries and the traditions and stuff like that. And we are going to talk about Madeira. So that's one of the reasons why I just put this little map to it. And we are on to the first one, Madeira. So I don't know if you like Madeira or not, but before we started, just a little bit of quiz. I didn't want to push too much pressure on you, but I did want to ask you, what do you think? What do you think Madeira? How is it made? What do you think about the alcohol levels of Madeira? What do you think how sweet they are? What do you think it's whether it's a liqueur, one the liqueur, one the naturel? What are the ideas or thoughts on Madeira? And again, if you don't like to speak up, that's fine. If you do, that's even better. So I'm gonna just ask you. I can even call you out. I know Maggie knows a big amount of um, stuff on Madeira, so maybe I'm going to ask Maggie first, just to answer the first couple of questions for me, just to ease everybody out and not put too much pressure on you. So Maggie, what do you think of Madeira?
This is the wine that we were just discussing that's made on the island of Madeira, which is a volcanic island, and it fits the profile of the ships that went around the world and couldn't return empty. So they would put wine onto the ship and it would travel, and then it would get to its destination and the ship would come back full of fish or other things.
Exactly.
It's part of the original trade route.
It is. And do you think it's always sweet, or do you think it's sometimes dry?
Sometimes dry. And I think that's one of the interesting things about a lot of the wines that we're tasting. Well, several of the wines that we're tasting, that they have a reputation for being only sweet, but they aren't always only sweet.
Exactly. So we basically we were thinking about the topic, and Maggie had a idea of doing sweet wines and fortified wines and things like that. And we also were a bit concerned about the sweetness level, because oftentimes people don't want to have 6 sweet wines taste because it's just too much. So we came up with an idea of having some wines that are made in a drier style or more sweet style, of dry style. And one of the very epic wines are basically Madeiras out there, one of the oldest wines made out there. And like Maggie said, it's not always sweet. I'm not saying it's super dry, because the driest is 25 grams per liter residual sugar. But it's not too much if you think about it. There's a driest style in Madeira. But it's definitely a wonder naturel. And it's also not always sweet. It can be quite dry for us when you look at the sweet and fortified wine aspects. And the alcohol level is average around 20%, I would say. And it is made in a very interesting way. I'm going to talk about it in a bit. And it's quite similar to Marsala, not the way it's made, but the way it tastes like and the way it looks like. So if you have never been to Madeira, that was my dream come true a year or two ago, to go to Madeira, and I did go there. And I thought that was one of the most amazing places on earth. And by its history, it says it was burned down hundreds of years ago just because they couldn't do anything around there. It was too foresty. There were too many trees, so they couldn't really make a living out there. So they burned apparently the whole island down so they can do agriculture on the land. But now everything kind of grew back. They don't do much but wine and fishing, and it's absolutely beautiful. And this is one of the most, and I actually took this picture, and I know you can see this picture all over the place if you Google Madeira. But you can, these are all vineyards, and if you think about it, Madeira is such a small island, and it's very narrow on the side, so there's a lot of high cliffs. And the biggest vineyards are the smallest, the minimum, the average size of one vineyard is 0.3 hectares. And it's very, very, very tiny, like one of the tiniest in the whole world when you consider the wine growing regions. And it's absolutely beautiful. And it's got grape varieties that may sound very weird, but you should probably remember a few, including Cercia, Valdejo, Boal, Momzi, and Terrantes, because these are the noble grapes. Even though most of the production is made out of Tinta Negra, the first 5 are the noble grapes, and the first 4 are actually white grapes. And they are going to talk about, the grapes are actually talk about the sweetness levels. And again, these pictures I took when I was there hiking and walking around. And if you look at it, it's like, Jesus Christ, it's absolutely beautiful. Like, you gotta go there at least once in your lifetime. And some more pictures. And on these pictures, you can see that there's only a few vine rows. There's not much going on. It's really just a handful of few vine rows, and that's it. And then you have to go and find another free spot where you can actually plant your vine. So I'm going to talk about the sweetness level in a second. But when it comes to how to make wine in Madeira, so Maggie said, and I also said that on the natural trade, what happened is that they would put wine into barrels and they would ship it all over that cordial effects area. So go to Africa, American places like that. But what happened is that by the time they got to a place where they want to sell it, it just turned out a very different wine. And the reason why is because it's basically got heated up, chilled down, heated up and chilled down on the bon voyage. And so this heating and cooling effect turned the wine into something very different than it was when it started off from the boats. So that's what they try to do nowadays. They try to copy how to make the original one, and they call it the Vigno Tosado, let me take a peek, I forgot. Vigno Roda and Vigno El Volta. And that's where basically they do travel with a boat throughout the equator and back from Madeira, imitating the same effect that was happening back in the days. So that's the most original way of making Madeira. It's really rare they do it, but some still do it and it's crazy expensive. The other two ways of doing it is either you warm it up, the stainless steels, which is called estufas. So they warm it up to about 45, 50 Celsius for about 3 months time, and then they let it sit for another 3 months, and then they are going to bottle it. But this is going to go to the cooking Madeira, more cheap kind of style of Madeiras. The more special Madeiras, and most of the Madeiras you see with vintage dates on it and with indication of age on it are going to be made with the canteiro process, which is basically having all these barrels in lofts and let there for about minimum 2 years, ideally minimum 3 years. So they are warming up in the summertime, cooling up in the winter time. So they get all these similar effects that they had back in the days. So the one that we are tasting is definitely made out of the most high level of aging, the canteiro. And if you take a look at this, we took this picture when we were there, and that's the seal. So what I was told there on the island is that basically you have to keep your wine in this barrel for at least 2, but ideally 3 years time. And you cannot, and some barrels are dropping, and some barrels are having some leakage, and some barrels are a bit weird. Some wines are coming up on the top. There's some problems with it, but you're not allowed to open it because this is a seal which was given from the Madeira Wine Company to them. And if they open it, they cannot sell the wine anymore. So that is the seal on top that after 3 years time, you can actually open. And these are some barrels, again, in lofts where they keep them. It's nothing fancy of a loft. It's basically just a loft next to the vineyards. And the sweetness level. So when it comes to the sweet levels, Cercial is the driest. Verdejo is semi-dry or semi-sweet. Boal is a bit sweeter, and Momsey would consider to be a sweet wine. And I've got the exact sweetness levels, which they just changed not long ago, so I have to update it. I just couldn't find information yet. But for Cercia, it would be about 25, 50 grams, Verdejo 60, 80, Boal 80, 100, and Momsey is up to 120. And just to give you an idea, sweet wine from France, from Sauternes is at least around 120, 150 grams sugar per liter. So what we are drinking right now is actually not super sweet, because the Cercia, it's around 25 grams per liter per sugar per liter. And so this is the Zsofi. So I don't know why I put myself in it, but because the only picture I found with all the bottles of it tastes was this one. So he's still in this same generation, and this is the only, there's 8 Madeira companies in the whole world, and only 5 of them are exporting wines. And this is the only Madeira company that has very old vines still. So we got to taste up till 1870s. And if you can see, there's quite a bottle here lined up, and there were even more. I think we tasted about 40, 50 Madeiras dating back to the 1860s, 70s. And it's something absolutely unbelievable. And sometimes they don't even bottle, they only bottle them when they think it's ready. So there's some barrels there, which from the 1950s, 40s, 30s, that they haven't even been bottled yet because they thought, let's wait a bit longer. So it's, and I think I never got really emotional wine tastings, but after this, I think I was crying a little bit, just because the thought of it, that the people who made it, this wine, might not be around anymore, and they never got to really taste the final product. It gives me goosebumps, and I think it's got so much history that it's something really special that we have in our glass. So it's a 31-year-old wine that was heated up for about quite a few years time, and I think it was bottled only 5 years ago. So it was in these barrels for over 25 years. And like you can see on my little notes, and I actually tied them up when I was talking to Gail for Zsofi. They said they have about 6 million liters in stock, and they have the biggest stock of old Madeiras in the whole island. And they only started to export in the 1986.
Zsofi, it's Maggie here. Quick question. What influence does leaving it in the barrel for so long have on the wine? Why do they do that, and why are there various different lengths of time? What happens to the wine, and what's the purpose of that?
So leaving in a barrel wine is basically making the wine age quicker in some ways and make it a bit more oxidative. And it sounds a bit weird and maybe scary, because if you hear oxidative, you might be like, oh my God, so it's bad, it's oxidized, but it's not really. It just brings out a bit more oxidative style of the fruit quality, of the floral quality. So when you smell this wine, you have a lot of dried fruit, don't you? You should have a lot of raisiny aromatics to it. The fruit is raisinated, the floral notes are dried. There's a lot of caramelized, almost cooked kind of aromatics to it. I don't know if there's anyone who don't have the wines. If you don't have it, I'm so sorry, and I hope you get it in time. But if you do have it and you have a sniff of it, I think it's absolutely amazing. It's got caramel and nuts and cashew and a lot of floral notes and a lot of sweet spices. So Maggie, to answer your questions, I think barrel, depending on, I mean, for winemaking, it gives extra taste to it. It gives some sweetness to it. It gives a bit more cinnamon, baking spice characteristics to it. If it's French oak, if it's American oak, it would give cinnamon and nutmeg and oak coconut taste to it. But it's a bit more, it's also mellowing down acidity in winemaking. It gives extra tannin to the wines as well. So it's got many, many purposes. But when it comes to this wine, it's basically just aging it a bit more oxidatively. And when it comes to other style of wines, when we're going to get to the sherry, it's going to have a whole other purpose to it. I hope that answered your question briefly. So what do you think of the wine? Is there anyone who'd like to say something? I'm loving it.
Excuse me, Zsofi, a quick question.
Yes.
This is delicious. Very, very nice. And I wouldn't dare do anything like this today with this great wine, but I grew up 30, 40 years ago with hearing that this type of Madeira wine would be a good cooking wine. And of course, you know, like I say, I wouldn't waste this on cooking, but how would you differ between something that is used just for cooking because it's got nice qualities and something that, of course, you would savor as something like a glass like this to drink?
I'm trying to find a picture, but I didn't put any picture on it. So basically, if I go here, not here. So this one will help. So basically, all these wines that are vintage dated are going to have, you can't see my glass, it's so weird when I have a virtual background. So I'm not just waving at myself, it's really, I'm just holding a glass. Is basically vintage dated, so it has at least 3 years in barrel. And on top of that, if it's a Frescoera, and most of the very well-made wines could be, then it has to be aged for at least 20 years time in barrel. So all the vintage dated Madeiras are going to be much more precious. So don't use your vintage dated Madeiras on cooking. But if you see a Madeira that has 5 years old written in it, 10 years old or 15 years old, use them for cooking. I do use for cooking 5-year-old Madeiras. They still might be aged in barrel, but most of these Madeiras, when it comes to the generic Madeiras, are the lowest ones. The generic Madeiras would be the ones that is even better for cooking. I just like the 5-year-old because it's just better quality, so my food turns out even better. But if you use the generic Madeira, that spent 3 years, and that's it, and then it's bottled. And most of these Madeiras are made by the fake heating, not just leaving them on the loft. So they made the process much quicker. So it's much cheaper to produce them, and they are not aged in barrels, or they age for a little bit in barrels. And when it comes to the cooking wine, those are mostly the Madeiras you can buy in bulk. So most of these wineries are actually just delivering in bulk in huge barrels or plastic barrels Madeira to certain countries to sell for kitchens and in the industry. But if you go to a shop and you want to buy Madeira for cooking, try to find the generic Madeiras, or maximum the 5, maximum 10 years of Madeiras, but don't go really up higher because it's just a waste of good juice. And but for cooking, it's fantastic. I love cooking with Madeira, and I just cooked yesterday. What did I cook? I can't remember what I cooked, but I remember I used Madeira, and then I drank some Madeira after I cooked some. And it was a 5-year-old Verdejo from the Blendies, and it's very cheap, and it's amazing to drink, and it's amazing to cook with. And if you don't want to cook with it, then you can have it. What I like this to be to drink with. I don't know if you heard about the Pall Mall book, but we have a Pall Mall book that our chef and our head of wine have wrote, and they created a dish which is chicken lollipop. So they pop the little rings of the chicken, and they make it look like a lollipop. And they cook it in Madeira and soy sauce and caramel and sugar and all these things. So becomes very sticky. And then they serve it with a glass of Madeira. I think that's one of the best pairing I ever had. And on top of that, you can have it with sticky date pudding, with chocolate puddings, with toffee, coffee, all kinds of, rich sweets. And I think it's great with also hard cheeses. I love them with hard cheeses.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Real quick follow-up question. The Tinta Negra, is that a grape that is grown on other areas of Portugal or Spain, etc., and used in other types of wine that we might hear? Because it's a common grape.
Yes, Tinta Negra, I believe, is used also in port. They're using dry red wine making as well. Is the workhorse of Madeira, and this is basically the grape that is mostly used in the generic Madeiras as well. It's changing now. I think there's more and more, we call them noble grapes, that are planted, more Sercia, Verde, Oboal, and Momsey, but it's such a limited area Madeira is that it's really hard to find new spots. So either they're going to pull out some Tinta Negra vines and plant more of the noble grapes, but I think it's gonna shift, because I think there's more and more attention on Madeira, and it hasn't been too much attention in the last 20 years, I think. Or so. I don't know. I haven't been drinking 20 years ago, but then I was told that 20 years ago it was maybe port time, but Madeira was much earlier. And I think Madeira needs a bit of advertisement, because I think it's such an amazing wine. It's not even super expensive, and it gives a lot of pleasure. So yes, Tinta Negra is used in many, many countries, mostly in Spain and Portugal. But for fortified wine, it's probably port and Madeira that is used for.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Is there anyone who does not like it and says, oh my God, this is horrible? I cannot see anybody doing this or making a sad face. I think everybody's pretty happy with it who's drinking it. All right, shall I go to the next one?
Yes, please.
So, number 2, please pour yourself number 2, which is a tawny port made by Fonseca, and it's 20-year-old. And the same questions kind of arise. It's not something you must have to answer, but it's something that kind of raises the question: what is the difference between port and Madeira? Why this tastes so different from Madeira? Why is this whole thing? What is this whole thing about? And I must say that it's sometimes very difficult. Because there's so many different regulations, and oftentimes I called my Spanish friend today and I said, man, I studied sherry for so long, but I still don't get this. And then at the end I realized it's because they just made their own rules at the end of the day, and you're like, wow, how should I figure that then? So sometimes it can be quite difficult to understand, but port is quite simple. So port is going to be very similar to Madeira in a style of winemaking, but there's going to be very big difference, and that's that port is not really heated up, so they don't want to heat up port and cool it off. So, but it's still a fortified wine, and it's a Wanda Natural. So some of them are sweeter, some of them are drier, but I would say the average sweetness of port would be around 100 grams. So compared to this one that we just had, the Madeira, it's going to be a bit sweeter, even though it might doesn't feel like it, but it will be. Sorry, I just followed my last drop of Madeira, and I kept a little for later. So number 2, let me just get my little bottle. Feel free to try it. And I think it's interesting to compare and contrast flavors as well when it comes to it, because there's such a wide range of how these fortified wines can smell and taste like. It smells pretty good. So, oops. Port. So port is in Portugal, as its name refers to, and it's made in Douro Valley, and that's how it looks like. Again, if you've never been to Port and Douro Valley, this is a picture I've taken after buying some sausages and bread, and just sitting, trying to find a spot to sit and just take a view of this beautiful place. And that's how it looks like almost wherever you go in Douro Valley. That's how it is, and it's absolutely breathtaking. And it's one of the first region that has been identified as a winemaking region, so it's pretty exciting. And so port it could be quite hot, especially the more inland you go. And there's the Douro Superior. Cima Corgo and Baixa Corgo are the beginning of the area. Cima Corgo is probably it's the most widely planted one. Baixa Corgo is the most well-known region, and where the most famous port houses are located at, not physically, but there where the vineyards are. And the Douro Superior is basically the warmest and the biggest area. And you can make actually still wine there, you can make sparkling wine there, you can make sweet wine there, you can make fortified wine there. So there's a lot of different styles that are made in port. And basically it's made out of Tinta Roriz and Touriga Nacional and Tinta Franca, Tinta Chao, Tinta Barroca. So if you drop the Tinta, you just have to remember Roriz, Nacional, Franca, Chao, and Barroca. Tinta means red. But these names can be quite difficult to remember. It's got loads of synonyms in Portugal and Spain. Another slide on the grapes. So there's white grapes as well, and there's also red grapes. And I think you heard about white port. It's become very trendy nowadays, and they make white port with tonic. So basically, instead of doing a gin and tonic, now it's a white port and tonic thing that's going on, and it's very, very delicious. So it's worth a try. But generally speaking, they are using mostly red grape varietals for the usual port, except the white ports. And it's interesting to look how the bottles have been changed since the 1700s. So it was very tiny and wide, and they changed the bottle forms so many times. By the end of the beginning of the 19th century, they actually found the right size of the port bottles. And of course, it's still changing, and tawny ports oftentimes still look a bit different. But that's the generic port bottle nowadays. And these are the ships that they used to use, just because by law, if you make port, they changed not long ago this rule, but you basically were harvesting your grapes wherever in the valley, and you had to transfer your wines that were made to the shore, which is basically the Villanova de Gaia, or Porto Villanova de Gaia. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I was in Villanova de Gaia. So to basically the port, and that's where they were aging the wines. So you had to age it there. Nowadays you don't really have to do that, but back in the days that's how you had to. And they were using these Rabello ships to transfer the wines to the Oporto, which is again pretty cool.
Is that a photo of Porto?
Yeah, I took this picture, just how the Douro is basically turning around. I can't remember which part, but this is the most busy and buzzy area where you can find almost most of the port houses alongside the shore. And yeah, I don't know when was it, a couple of years ago. And this was also taken around that time. And I don't know which port house is this. I can't read it. Panascan.
Can I ask you, Zsofi, is there any similarity to the types of grapes used between a really classic Douro, Portuguese Douro wine, red wine, and the Porto, tawnies that we're drinking now?
They use exactly the same grapes.
Same ones.
They use, yeah, and most of the times it's a blend, like port. Port is a blend, and most of the red wines from Douro Valley are a blend as well. They started to do single grape varieties for the dry red wines. I think there's a couple of port houses who might have started to do single grape ports, but I haven't tried them yet. Yeah, but the grapes are usually the same, and they have to age them in so-called port pipes, which are 550 liters. And this is even regulated on how big of the barrel has to be when you're aging here and you're aging there, but I'm not going to get into that big of details. But what's really cool about Douro is the soil. It's schist, and everywhere you go in Douro around the vineyards, you have this schisty soil, which is great with drainage. And it's also quite hot. So the problem sometimes in Douro is that it can be very, very hot. And that's why alcohol levels for the dry red wine making could be pretty tough. And again, some pictures I've taken on the vineyards. So that's how the vineyards look like. It's very nicely terraced, and it goes like all around the basic to the river. So what they do here is that they fortify the wine depending on what is the sweetness level they would like to get. And that's what they basically do. And they use a thing called aguardente, which is called the burning water, that they add to the fermenting must wherever the sweetness level they like to achieve to. And that's about 75 degrees alcohol that they add to it, which stops the fermentation because it kills all the yeast, so that it doesn't ferment anymore. And you are left basically with sweet wine. And that's what they do with port. And of course, you probably know there's different type of ports made. There's so many different ports that you can find, but the average alcohol would be around 20%, similar to Madeira when it comes to the alcohol. And when it comes to grapes and punching grapes, they still do use these traditional lagars. So basically cement tanks where all these beautiful gentlemen, like them, they are stepping on the grapes. That's the traditional method of making and fermenting and squeezing juice out of grapes. And actually, I asked them, "May I take a picture of you?" Because I kind of need it for my studies. And they said yes. And I even took a little video of them singing. So it's pretty cool what they do. It's really rare. These ports and dry wines that are made this way are much more special, of course, because of the human factor. But that's the way they did it. So if you see a man around Douro Valley with the red leg and feet and stuff like that, they probably been stepping on grapes for a while now. So there's different styles, and that can be a bit confusing. But the big difference is that ruby wines are mostly the vintage wines. So if you see a vintage port, that will be a ruby, and that is aged in the bottle for a long time. They still age a little bit in barrel, depending on the style, like vintage port and single quinta vintage port and late bottle vintage port. But when they stop aging it for a little bit in the barrel, they age for a long time in the bottle. While the tawny, and I remember when I was studying, ruby has a B, so it's bottle aged. And tawny doesn't have a B, so it's barrel aged. I mean, actually, yeah, I don't know why I said that, because tawny bottle aged, it's say BB. I don't know. For some reason, if I think about ruby, it's bottle, and tawny is barrel, because it's an age, so BA, tawny. So barrel aged. And a barrel aged wine, so if you age something in the bottle, when it comes to fortified wines, it will remain more fruit and sweetness, aromatics. And if you age something in a barrel, simply, let's just put it in a simple way, it would have more nuttiness and aromatics like that. So if you try this wine, because it's a tawny, and it's a 20-year-old tawny, which doesn't mean that it was spent 20 years in barrel, but it means that the average age of the wine that has been added and taken off from this barrel is 20 years. And it tastes like a 20-year wine, but it's not actually that amount. That wine that was in this barrel is not 20 years old. So it's aged in oxidatively again, because it's aged in barrels for quite a long time. And the wood gives extra seasoning to it. So if you smell this wine, it's 20-year-old tawnies are still not super mature. So it would get even more nutty and almondy and figgy than if it's a 40-year-old tawny. But still, if you smell this, it's got a lot of, again, caramel, toast, vanilla, from these aromatics from the oak. And then on top of that, you have a lot of nuttiness to it. So tawny ports are much loved, again, with cheese because of these aromatics. And apparently in England, tawny with cashew blue or any kind of blue cheese from England is probably one of the most amazing things to try. So the difference between Madeira and this is obvious. The grape variety is obvious, the climate, the soil, and the winemaking. But still, it's a fortified wine, and it tastes so different. I don't know if you prefer port over Madeira.
Zsofi, quick question. This difference between rubies and tawnies, really fascinating. I mean, tawnies are always much lighter in color. Does that mean they're the tannins are all broken down by some interaction with the barrel because the bottle keeps the tannins intact, or what?
Well, barrel can give tannin to it, but it can also soften with time. So the barrel, and that's why it's a great question. If you ever tried then an old port, ruby port, if you open a 1960s, 70s, 80s ruby port, you have to decant it, and you are going to use tons of filters because it's got so much sediment, and it's exactly the tannin that breaks down. So a young ruby is, I tried many, I don't like it. It's horrible. It's just so tannic, and it's just fruit and tannic, and it's almost painful. But with age, as the tannin breaks down slowly in the bottle, because it's aged slower, it's gonna get softened, and it's got a lot of sediment, which is the breakdown tannin. While in tawny, it's aged oxidatively. It's a much quicker aging process, so everything is going to be much smoother in an early age. So yes, it's got to do with tannins. It's got to do with the barrel, and yeah, that's it. Basically, you're right on that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're a wine professional. Then I'm going to give you a little certificate.
No, I just love wine. You're the professional.
No, it's great. Absolutely. So barrel actually helps to soften things. If you think about Barolos, I don't know if you know about the Barolo Boys and the movie. If you never watched Barolo Boys movie, please do. So it's a new generation of young men and one woman, and it's still called Barolo Boys, Chiara Boschis. They basically broke the habits of the old winemaking, which was aging in huge barrels, and because they were just not approachable. So because the oxygen to wine was much smaller portion, but if you age in smaller barrels, you get the wine age much quicker, and it makes it much more approachable. And that's what they changed in Barolo. There's a new wave, so you don't have to wait 40 years to enjoy a bottle of Barolo. You can enjoy it at the age of 3, 4, 5. All right, so is there anyone who preferred the port over the Madeira?
We did, both of us, yeah.
Okay, there's quite a few. 1, 2, 3. Is that? Let me just 5, 4. There's a few of you. 5, 6. Oh, wow, there's a lot of you. I don't know. I'm just in love with Madeira. For me, that's the thing. I try to love port, but
Majority, a lot of us, yeah.
Yeah, most of you said port, which is great. I probably, I don't know why, but I'm just crazy in love with Madeira. I can't help it. I'm trying to drink more port, but if I have to pick, I'm just always going with Madeira, which is sad. I should get a bit more open-minded, I guess. All right, so I'm very curious about what you are going to say about this, because it's a less known area of wine. It's not the usual port kind of. I'm just pouring back into my bottle, because if I drink it all, I won't be able to speak at the end of this webinar. It's a very different style. I'm even changing my glass, and if you have a chance to change your glass, I would do so. This is not the order I wanted to, but the ladies in the office said they already printed it out and sent it. and I couldn't change it. But I think it's still okay. If you have a glass of water, maybe have a sip and pour yourself the next wine. So again, same kind of questions. And in this wine, I think I'm a bit more interested about what you are going to say. So good. My Spanish friend Roberto, who was our deputy head, he was very pleased with this choice of mine. And he couldn't stop talking about the wine to me on the phone today. So is there anyone who knows this producer, Navazo? Or who is familiar with the bottle numbers 8 and its way of being, or even just Fino sherry?
Yes.
Maggie, was it Maggie?
Yes. Actually, I'm just going to very quickly mention, this is a really interesting project because it's a collaboration between a complete non-professional wine person, a gentleman called Jesus Barquin, who is a criminal lawyer in Spain, but he is just a mad fiend for sherry. And he's very friendly with some sherry producers. And I can't remember the name of which winemaker in Jerez, which is the region where they make sherry.
No, he's, oh, wait.
Eduardo Tejada or something. I think it's Eduardo Tejada.
I can't remember. Let me check if I might have.
And in any case, they decided what they would do is go around to the different sherry producers and pick out specific bottles one at a time. They started with sherry. They've also done port and other kinds of wines, but they basically did a kind of a bespoke bottling. They picked out their favorite casks and decided that they would number them and produce a limited number of bottles of each, and once it's gone, it's gone. So it was a kind of a passion project. It started out as a passion project, and it kind of took off because it appeals to people who are really crazy about sherry and other similar style wines. I think they've done a couple of whiskeys. You probably know more than I do. That's about what I know because I only met them when they started the project. I haven't kind of kept up with them.
I mean, we did a webinar with them, and it was very fascinating. And exactly, Maggie, you're 100% right. So it was more of a fun thing. They went for a tasting, and they were tasting a barrel. They only taste from barrels, not bottles, because they are not bottled. And they tasted, and they were like, "How much is a bottle?" And like, "Well, it's we are not going to sell it." And they were like, "Why?" They're like, "Well, it doesn't work to bottle a barrel. Like it's just one barrel, and we don't have any more left, so we're not going to bottle it." And they were like, "So what do you do with it?" They were like, "Well, we might just gonna blend it or drink it or whatever, but we're not planning to sell on it." So they said, "That's crazy. Can we buy it?" And they said, "Yes, you can buy it." So that's how it started off. They realized there's so many amazing barrels left in Jerez that are not sold or nobody does anything with them. So they went around and they tasted barrels and barrels, and whichever they liked, they bought and they bottled them. And the first Bota barrel they found was called number 1, Bota number 1. But they have nothing to do with styles and stuff like that. Just the number of the barrel that was bought in order. So Bota number 68. It's not. It doesn't say the style. It doesn't say anything. It's just basically the barrel that was bought for the 68th time. And they even wrote a book. The gentleman you've said, the criminal lawyer. I'm so bad with names.
Oh, don't worry. I'll write it down in the chat.
He wrote a book with Peter Liam. On manzanilla sherry. I even don't remember the name of the book, even though I have it. Oloroso manzanilla sherry. And they wrote a book together. Hopefully the new edition is coming out. Peter Liam emailed me and said it's coming out hopefully in a couple of years' time. So it's definitely on the way. And he even got into it and he's writing books about it, which is pretty cool. Criminal lawyer, who would have thought? So anyway, so this is a Fino sherry. And Equipo Navazos is a group of friends. Yes, so it's written down here. I've already wrote down quite a few things. So it's a bit lower in alcohol, very tiny production because it's only 1 barrel. So it's a Vin de Naturel, just to start at the beginning. It's a sherry, it's a Fino sherry. It's less than 7,000 bottles made, and it's 15% alcohol, so lower than the previous ones. We are going to talk about why it's lower than that. And what they do is basically they pick the grapes and they fortify them, and then they are going to have a floor, which is a layer of yeast on top of it, and it was aged in oak under the floor for 10 years. And the floor looks like something like, where is it? This. It seems like I have to go through a few sites to get there. But anyways, we're gonna get there. Sorry. So we are in Jerez, and this is the area. And basically, San Lucar de Barrameda, Puerto de Santa Maria, and Jerez de la Frontera are called the triangles of sherry, the golden triangle, where the grapes source from. And the climate is again very, very hot. There's cooling winds and drying winds, the so-called Poniente and Levante. So it's a very hot desert-like area. It's got very different soils, but the best soils are the Albariza soils that they plant the vines on. And the grapes are Palomino, Pedro Jimenez, and Muscat. And the production is led by Palomino, almost 95%, and Pedro Jimenez and Muscat is only 5%. So Pedro Jimenez and Muscat will be the sweet sherry, and Palomino will be more on the drier side. They use Pedro Jimenez and Muscat as a sweetening agent, but most of the sherries that we know out there are dry, and they are made out of Palomino grape. And these are the soils, so you can see the different type of soils, the Albariza, which is mostly chalk, so it's super white, Barossa and Arenas, which are a bit more, so this is the Arenas, I believe, this more sandy one, and this is the Boros, which is more clay-like. You can see the color differences, and this is the Albariza soil. And if you go on the vineyards, this is what you see, all white. So if you see vineyards like that, it's the soil Albariza. So it's a white chalk soil. So this is where we might get confused. It's tough. It's really, really tough. But if you remember that if you drink a glass of Fino, remember that it will be dry, it will be 15% alcohol, it will be very saline, so salty and mineral. If you drink an Oloroso, it's similar in style, but it's much richer and bolder, and it has a bit more alcohol as well. So stylistically, that's kind of the difference. So if you like to have a very dry sherry, very crisp, refreshing, zesty sherry, you want to drink a Fino. If you like to have something that is a bit wider, richer, broader, you like to have an Oloroso. So the reason why is because when you ferment the wines, some barrels may develop floor, which I'm going to show you later. That's a thick yeast layer on top of the wine. And what it does, it lets the wine age biologically. So it creates a gap between the wine and the oxygen in the barrel. So it doesn't age oxidatively, but it ages biologically. This floor doesn't grow everywhere. You have to have a humid environment, and ideally this area of Jerez, because of the ocean and the dry weather, but the humidity, it creates very good environment for the floor. Even in Hungary, you can find floor, and also in Jura you find floor, and not every place have floor developed. So that's what makes sherry very special. But sometimes, because it's a fungus, I would say, or bacteria, it might just dies off. So imagine you have something very thick of a floor, and maybe in one day it disappears. And when it disappears, it starts to age oxidatively. And we talked about oxidative aging. It gives more richness to it, more body to it. So then it becomes Oloroso because the floor is dying off. If the floor is very thick and strong, then you're going to have Fino. This is, again, very, 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 very complex, I know. But what happens is sherry, you harvest your grapes, you put them into a place called sobretable, where the must is resting, and they wait. The people who make the wine, they wait and see whether the floor develops or not. And depending on if it does or not, they are going to act. But ideally, they are going to put in a cellar system. So let's say you put 5 liters in here, you can drain 5 liters down here. So the more on the bottom of the cellar you got, so if you get to the first criadera, the more aged wine you will have eventually. I've tried to put it in a very simple way, so pardon me if I'm struggling with it, but basically it's an aging process, the cellar system. where at the top you always add young wines, and at the bottom you always have the older wines, and that's how they age the sherry. And again, oxidative and biological aging. So biological aging is when you have this very thick floor, and you can see it. It's crazy. So it's basically, again, helping the wine to not oxidize. And if it's aged oxidatively, there's no floor. So I need to get a little water. And what happens is that if you fortify a wine, you have to fortify it at least above 15.5 ABV, so the floor completely dies off. So what does the winemaker do? The winemaker goes and be like, oh my God, that's a beautiful, beautiful floor. I love it. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to fortify it later on around 15% or less, but I did 50%. Or he comes here, or she, and says, this floor is a little bit dodgy. There's a little here, there's a little there. Doesn't really form. It doesn't really stick. I think it's gonna die off. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna fortify it much higher percentage, so the floor completely dies off, and I can drink a proper other style of wine and fino. Okay, so that's how we come back to you more like Oloroso style. I hope it's clear so far. And then you can find, again, dry styles, Fino, Oloroso, Amontillado, and Palo Cortado. So Palo Cortado is the god of Fino. So imagine Fino, which is great, and imagine the god of Fino. I'm trying to figure out for so long what's really the difference, and it's basically, there's not much of a difference. It's just Fino, which has much stronger floor for a much longer time. And Amontillado is more like an aged Fino, because the floor was developed and was there for a long, 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 long time, not like Oloroso, which dies off so quickly. But it was there for a long, long time, 10, 15 years, but then it died off. So it's basically become an Amontillado, an aged Fino. And the sweet ones are the PX and the Muscat styles. And then there's another one, just to make you even more confused, the San Lucar de Barrameda, which is basically, it's an other Manzanilla, but it's exactly the same. So it's the same style, but the difference is that the grapes and the wine, especially the wine, the barrels were in closer to the ocean in San Lucar de Barrameda. They believe whichever wine was aged closer to the ocean gets more finesse to it. So if you buy a Manzanilla, that's ideally more salty and even more complex if you ask a Spanish person. Whew, I know it's a bit difficult, but that was a shortish version I could do with sherry. Basically, there's hours and hours of webinars on sherry itself. So we are drinking a wine that had the floor, this beautiful, beautiful floor. So it was aged biologically, and it was fortified at 15%. It's completely dry because they only fortify it when the wine fermented to dryness. So it's not sweet, unless if you use PX and Muscat and you sun dry them and then you fortify them, it's going to be a sweet sherry. But other than that, every other sherry is going to be dry.
So Zsofi, thank you. I had a quick question on the chat. What's the difference between a Madeira and a sherry? It sounds like in the sherry, you're fermenting it totally until it's very, very dry, and then fortifying it. Yes. So it's always very dry. Is that kind of the difference, even though it's different grapes as well?
Yeah, that's the main difference. Again, there's no heating process in sherry, and there's no floor in sherry either. So those are the main differences. And also, yeah, the grapes, it just makes such a huge difference. But I think if you try this Fino, it's really the floor. And I don't know if you taste it, but it tastes like hops, like beer hops. Whoever doesn't like beer, I'm sure you did like when you were a kid, to drink the hop on top of the beer of your parents when they were having a glass of beer. Every kids do that. I did it. And it has this beer hoppy, a yeasty kind of flavor to it, isn't it?
Yep. Musty,
exactly. So that's the floor. And it's very, very, I would say, dusty, and yeah, it's beery or yeasty. When you I should have said when you bake a bread instead of drinking the foam of the beer. But yeah, if you that's my memory. But if you bake a bread and you use yeast, that's how it smells like. Except obviously it's much better than yeast. it's got much more to it. Again, it's got this nutty aromatics to it. It's got a lot of saltiness to it. It's got a lot of dried fruit, dried florality to it. I think it's very floral. I've got a lot of white florality notes, jasmine, and white tea kind of aromatics to it. So also the taste is very different. But winemaking wise, yes, Dan, that's the difference.
Zsofi, Maggie here. I just wanted to find. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm conscious of the time, of course, but I just had a generic question on all of these. When they're sweet and fortified, and you open a bottle, what's the aging? You know, when you open wine, a day or two is sort of the lifespan. What about for these sorts of wines?
Well, when it comes to Madeira, it ages forever. So you can easily. I'm just pouring the next wine, and you can also pour your next wine while I'm answering this question. So Madeira, generally speaking, can age forever because it's basically super oxidized, very much heated up kind of style of wine. So if you open a bottle of Madeira now and you drink it in 5 years' time, you're going to be fine. The rest is a bit more sensitive, I would say. I think the most sensitive would be for me the Fino sherry, but again, that still will be okay for a few months time. So I would say from 3 months to 6 months time, you should be pretty okay with them. And even then, they won't go bad, but they would turn into something different. But they won't go bad. Tawny port are pretty safe. Osu and Osu is, well, I would drink all of them within 3 months time, if I'm honest, except the Madeira and the tawny port, just because that's where it shows its best. But it's not gonna go super bad after that either. And Madeira whenever you like to drink it. Even the 6.5 Puttanios Osu will be okay, but it would just lose its exciting fruit profile. I think it's just gonna become something different. I don't know, Maggie, if you have a different experience with it, but usually I don't recommend to have fortified wines after 6 months time, and I always prefer them when they are opened freshly within 3-6 months time to drink it. Madeira anytime.
Yes, I agree. And also the other nice point is that some of these wines can, in the bottle unopened, can age for hundreds of years, which is really, really interesting. I mean, I've had Madeiras from the late 18th century, and they sometimes lose their, well, you don't actually know, the interesting things, you don't actually know whether they were vinified as sweet wines, but they still taste great, and then they still last once you open them. One thing I was going to ask is, with the Fino that we just had, what kind of food would you recommend for something like that?
Oh, Roberto would be much better, but it does, because I've never been to Jerez. It's so, and that's why we don't sell too much sherry either. But I like fish with it, of course. I like sun-dried tomatoes, sardines, olives, all kinds of Spanish charcuterie, Spanish fish, cured meat, cured fish, smoked fish. I think it goes really well with salads, and again, like some kind of sardines on top of it. And what else? Yeah, I always loved it with things like let's say a bruschetta, but with olives and sun-dried tomatoes and a little bit of fish on it. That would be probably my favorite thing with it. But I think it's also good with cheese again, because it gives some saltiness to it. So oftentimes I find hard cheeses really, really good with fortified wines, especially the ones that are a bit salty, like Comté. I do like it with Fino sherry. Many people like it with dry red wine. I like it with Fino sherry. So there's certain type of cheese that is more salty. I prefer it with sherry. But that's again my taste. But I love Barolo with cheese. So, and some people just don't. So that's my personal input in that.
Zsofi,
Yes.
the soil of these sherry wines you said was very, very chalky. The olive groves are typically in a similar chalky soil, right? Would they work together?
Which ones? Sorry, which
Olives, typically Spanish olives, etc. Wouldn't they? Aren't they in a similar soil? Would they work together?
You mean sherry and olives? Oh, big time. And
Yeah.
just and maybe sprinkle some oregano on top. and a little bit of olive oil, and then, like I said, some kind of smoked fish, and then you're in heaven.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So because there might be some other things you have to do after the tasting. I know I've been taking it very slowly, but like Tim said, we might have to be a bit more cautious about the time. So I'm sorry about that. Let's go to number 4, which is a Marsala. If I'm honest with you, I don't drink Marsala very often. Very, very rarely I drink Marsala, and it's just because maybe just not in the common mind. It's not like something that you go to a restaurant and be like, oh, let's have a glass of Marsala. And like you might say, let's have a glass of Chardonnay, but you don't say let's have a glass of Marsala. So it's a very different type of wine. They say it's quite similar to Madeira, but is there anyone who'd like to say something on Marsala? Like, I don't know, I always drink Marsala. I don't understand why is it not so famous? Or I never had Marsala in my life. There might be some of you who never tried it, or some of you who loves it. Bikash and Supriya, you wanted to say something, I can tell. But you either ask to unmute. I'm gonna let you speak. There you go.
No, we're enjoying it. It's really nice, and it goes very well with a lot of things.
Nice. So what are you eating now with it? Do you have some nuts and olives or
We have
something?
we have some hard cheese, so a mixture of hard cheese.
Yeah, no olives, unfortunately.
Sadly, no olives. No.
Very nice. So you like Marsala?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I
do
was
you
going to
drink
say
it often
that
then?
I've never
Love
heard
it.
of white Marsala. This is, to me, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. And you know, this producer Deborah is one of the most famous ones out there. So this is a beautiful picture of Sicily on satellite. I always like to use satellite pictures because it shows you how dry certain places are in the island and how green it is and things like that. So we are in Italy. We are here on the top west part of Italy, where there's a designation of origin called Marsala. So that's where it actually has a designation of origin. And if you go to Italy, everything has a DOC or DOCG. Olives, nuts, everything. They always they like to do all these DOCs and everything, which is great. But it's maybe more difficult for me who studies for exams to remember all of them. But it's basically, again, a fortified wine, and it is for Sicily indeed. It's been known around the 18th centuries, and it's basically, again, fortified either during the fermentation or at the end, the fermentation at the beginning, depending on the sweetness level that is desired in the wine itself. And then I think you mentioned cooking. Well, Marsala is something that they use for cooking, and mostly for cooking, and they say it's quite similar to Madeira. I don't know if I agree with that or not yet, because it's been a long time I tried, but it's very similar to Madeira in its style, not in winemaking, but in taste and smell, they say. And yes, Maggie, so what happens in Madeira, Marsala, there's grapes, so-called Grillo, Ansonia, Catarratto, Damasceno. Grillo and Ansonia, called Isolina, are the most well-known white grapes. Catarratto and Damasceno are very high-yielding grapes, so they are more like for quantity, not quality, even though they are good. But the most well-known and most important grapes are the Grillo and Ansonia. And for red, there's Pericone, Calabresa, Nerello Mascanesa. Basically, all these grapes are used for dry white and dry red wine production. Same in Porto. All these grapes that they are used also for dry wine production. And when it comes to Marsala, there's different colors. So there's gold, amber, and ruby. So gold is oro, amber is umbra, and ruby is rubino. And that's the way they basically classify them as styles. So Maggie, when you have white ones, the golden and amber one will be your choice, because the ruby has up to 30% white grapes, but 70% is the ruby one. So you probably had mostly ruby style of Marsalas. And even on the ruby, you can blend white grapes in it. And again, depending on how sweet you want it, you can make it dry, semi-sweet, or sweet. They actually call secco, semi-secco, and dolce. And it's, I think, the driest is 40 grams, the semi-sweet is 40 to 100, and the sweet is above 100 grams per liter in sweetness levels. And they are also aged in barrels, depending on what is your quality level, from 1 year to up to 10 years even. And they basically sweeten with two things, with mosto cotto and sifone. And basically, Mostacotto is the cooked must, and Sifona is fortified grapes, which was fortified at the very beginning. So it's sweet fortified grapes. And if you do Mostacotto, which you can see on the picture, these are considered more in the Umbra style, and those are less known or less quality levels. So Oro and Rubin are higher quality levels than Umbra. And just because for sweetening, they are not using Sifona, which is much better of a sweetening agent, but they use this cooked Mostacotto. There's something here written much. I probably should have put it white so you can't read it. And the flavors, you got a lot of apricot and vanilla and tamarind and brown sugar and tobacco kind of aromatics to it when you smell it. And I was looking for what makes it different, what makes it special. And again, you asked it a few times, what's the difference then? Again, very different grapes, very different climate. And it's the same with every food and every person and personalities and even grapes. Depending on where you grow, how is the climate around you, what is your soil like, you are going to be just different. And depending on what the winemaker does with you makes you also a bit different. But it's not different in winemaking technique as port is. It's just the climate and the grapes that are very, very difficult. And sometimes they use Solera, so they age exactly the same way as sherries, sometimes, but not always. And that's another picture when Mount Etna was quite active. Look at that. I just thought it's interesting to put that picture in. So what do you think about it?
It's similarly sweet to the Porto, but
Yes.
it's got a very different character and flavor.
I think it's closest to port when it's come to making it.
Yeah.
For me, it tastes the most sweet and the highest in alcohol. So it's 18% alcohol. So it's lower alcohol than Madeira, higher than sherry, similar to port. But for me, it tastes the highest in alcohol and it tastes the sweetest of all so far. It's still great though. I can see why it's amazing with cooking as well. I'm gonna just go to 5 and then 6, and if you have any questions after that, I'm happy to answer. So, of course, we have to talk about Hungarian sweet wine, and I think Maggie, you're very happy that I put a Hungarian sweet wine in the selection because you do like Hungarian sweet wine. You're a big ambassador for Hungarian sweet wines. So there's one that we have now. Let me just go to the. So this wine is 11.5% alcohol. It's got 148 grams sugar, and just anything else. Yeah, that's what I want to kind of share with you just up front before we try. So far this will be the sweetest in style, and this will be the lowest in alcohol in style. And what do you think? How is it made, Asu? You can guess. So it could be naturally sweet, so left on the vine. It could be fortified, so done moutage, like port and sherry, or it could be affected by botrytis. I think Tim would like to guess. After I let you chew on your nuts. Sorry.
Yeah, you caught me eating.
I know, I'm sorry. I just realized it. I just remembered you had a couple of questions, so I didn't see you, but then I saw you were chewing. I'm sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt you. So Tim, what do you think?
Well, I've always liked Tokai. I think it's a special wine, special dessert wine at the end of a meal. I think it's different than anything we've had. Its sweetness is probably not as heavy as a Marsala or the port. In between, I would say. And it's a refined. To me, it's a very refined taste. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Tim. Amazing. Well done. You actually put everything in a nutshell for me, and I agree with you. It's got this gingery taste, which is very special, I believe. So that's a map of Tokai. Super tiny parcels again. Famous for botrytis, so it's made with botrytis grapes. So again, another grape picture on botrytis, this fungus. And I find always botrytis affected wine a bit gingery, quite spicy in style. So if you're curious about botrytis, Sauterne, it's probably bring you most of your bars. Sauterne in Bordeaux is made by botrytis. In Mosa, Germany, the wines called Trockenbeerenauslese, Beerenauslese, ice wine, they are made from botrytis. And there might be a couple of other places where you have botrytis, like in South Africa, oftentimes Chenin Blanc has botrytis on it, or in the Loire Valley. But for sweet wine production, maybe Loire, Mosel, Hungary, Tokai, and Bordeaux Sauternes would be the most famous ones. And again, you need climate for it. But that's how the grapes look like. So you have a dry grape here, and then you make late harvest wines from these grapes. And then you make samorodni, which means as it comes. And then you make Osu wines. So basically, to produce 1 bottle of 6 puttonyos Osu or a bottle of Essentia, how much grapes do you think we need? And basically the answer is, so one day, one person can pick 12 kilograms of these Osu berries. Imagine you are out there whole day and you only pick 12 kilograms and you're going up and down like crazy on the vineyards, trying to find just these perfect grapes. And then you end up having 12 kilograms and you need 100 kilogram healthy grapes that will turn into 20 Osu grapes. So that kind of tells you how much grapes you need to make a bottle of Osu wine. So that's the reason why Sauternes is expensive, Hungarian sweet wine is expensive, because the amount of healthy grapes you have to kind of like give up on just to have a bottle of wine is crazy. So you need about 100 kilograms of healthy grapes to produce a bottle of Osu. So it's pretty special. And the sweet wine sweetness levels, it's basically the difference between 5 and 6 puttonyos would be just a sweetness. You can always declassify your 5 puttonyos. So if your wine has 160 grams, you can still call it as 5 puttonyos. You don't have to call it 6 puttonyos. Samorodni is less sweet. And of course, the higher the sugar level, the lower the alcohol is. So it's quite low in alcohol. It's very, very easy to drink. And what happens is that you harvest these Osu grapes. You put them into the puttony, which is this wooden barrel. It's around 32 kilograms. You take it to the cellar. You put these grapes in the puttony. You put it in the barrel. I don't have any barrel picture. There you go. No. You put it in a barrel, and basically 5 and 6 puttonyos means that in the same amount of must, you give 5 of these Osu grapes, or 6. And of course, if you put 6, it's going to be sweeter. If you put 5, it's going to be less sweet. So 5 puttonyos is just referring to how many puttony, so this wooden bag of worth of Osu berries you have given to the same must. And then if you go and talk about Essentia, that's basically how much of natural grapes comes out from Osu grapes. And that's even sweeter. It comes up to 800 grams per liter. It's crazy. But it's like ambrosia. So it's going to heal you. If you're sick, just have a sip of Essentia. And this is how Hungary Tokai cellar look like. So all the golden, delicious, beautiful juice with the very old cellars and dusty bottles. So I hope you like it. I mean, obviously I love it. And I think the reason why Hungarian sweet wine is great is because the grapes in it, the Furmint, Haslevelű, Zeta, and all these grapes have such high acidity that even though the sugar level is very, very high, the zestness, the freshness is still there. And probably that's why I prefer Hungarian sweet wine over Sauternes, is because Sauternes is higher in alcohol, more flabby, more alcoholic, less acidic. So it's nice to have a glass of it, but to have a bottle of sweet wine, you can much easily enjoy a Hungarian one. But that's my opinion. And it's not because I'm Hungarian, it's really truly what I like and what I prefer. Anyways, I go to the next one. So at the end, if there's a question or two, I can still answer. So Vinsanto. So it's not Vinsanto, it's Vinsanto. Vinsanto is from Italy. Vinsanto is from Greece. If you speak to an Italian and you say I like to have Vinsanto, they're going to be very offended. If you talk to a Greek person, you say I like to have a glass of Vinsanto, they will be offended. So be very careful on Greeks and Italians. So it's Vinsanto. And it's basically made again naturally. So sun-dried grapes were left in about August under the sun for quite a long time. So they raisinate the grapes beforehand. And this is the youngest style of of why. So as you can see, they harvest the grapes, they put it outside on mats under the sun, and they let it there for about 6 to 8 days or so. So they let the grapes to concentrate, to dry, and then they are going to press it. There's no fortification on this wine or the previous one. They are purely naturally made sweet wines. The difference is that it's not raisinated on the vine, it's raisinated after harvest outside under the sun. And what else? Obviously, the grapes are different. So they use Assyrtiko, Aetheri, and Aidani. And they use also the grapes like Monemvasia, Moscato, but the most led grapes are these three: Assyrtiko, Aetheri, and Aidani. And all these grapes and vines are planted in a colura, so it's almost like a little basket. The reason why is because we are in Santorini, is because it's very, very hot, it's very windy, there's not much moisture, so the vine protects itself, and in between the leaves, the morning kind of moist would stay there and protect the wine and give enough moisture to the vine to survive. As well, it protects from the grapes itself from very, very heavy sun effects and the wind effect. So they train the grapes in coluras in small little basket. So you can imagine the harvest. You do have to have very strong backs and knees, because it's obvious and not easy to harvest these grapes. And then you harvest your grapes, you put them outside on these mats, and you let them out for a few days time. And then they are going to look like something like this. So it gets much darker in color. They start to raisinate. And that's when you're going to press them. And this is actually one of the barrels where this wine is made from. So then they age in barrels for a little while. Same with Osu, same with this one, it's aged in barrels. And then you have this beautiful estate of Argios. You can see how it looks like. Again, go to Santorini, not just to have a wedding there, but just, go and visit some vineyards. It's beautiful. And that's it. Sorry, I rushed to the last couple one. I just wanted to make sure that, how can I do and show, there you go. I stopped sharing screen. So, and everybody stayed on. That's amazing. Thank you so much. It was much longer than I hoped to be, and you still stayed on. That's amazing. Thank you. I haven't even tried.
Can I ask Zsofi, how much Vinsanto is produced in Tuscany or somewhere in Italy versus Greece? Because this is a Greek example, but
quantity-wise, I got no clue. But I'm sure that Santorini makes less than Tuscany. A much smaller area, much more difficult to make wine, much lower yields, like super low yields, like 1/3 of Vinsanto in Italy. And Italy, in Italy, Vinsanto can be quite dry as well, and it's much more oxidative in style, much more flubby. And I think Santorini is much more elegant, much more fresh, and it's always sweet.
So do they use the same grapes in Greece? Because Santorini is also one of the very few Greek areas that has pretty good red wines. But
in Santorini, they use most of these white wines, white grapes. Assyrtiko is the most light grape variety. While in Italy, they use very different grape varieties for Vinsanto. Also, they are not drying them under the sun. They're keeping them in lofts and just let them dry very, very slowly for much longer time. They also have more extensive oak aging as well to it. So in the winemaking is different, the grape is different. And I like both style, if I'm honest with you. I like Vinsanto in Italy for its pure fruitiness, if it's sweet. And I like this one because it's chocolatey and caramelly and toasty. So again, it's very, very different. I think Vinsanto is a bit more fruity if it's made in the style that I think is great, the sweet style. And Vinsanto is a bit more chocolatey and toffee and coffee in style. It's nice.
Can we ask you about the order in which it was decided to go through these wines? We've been wondering why in this particular order.
Let me think. I probably would have started with the Fino. Then I would have, so I would go probably Fino, Fino. It's tough though, but definitely starting with Fino and finishing off with maybe the Osu, just because it's much fresher. And then I would have probably, I don't know. It's difficult. I was actually thinking about it. What would I have done? But then they decided for me, so I didn't really have to think twice. But now that you now that you asked me, probably Fino. Uh, uh, Probably Tawny Sherry, just to take them side by side, the most well-known production, most well-known fortified wines. And I would have done probably Marsala after that, and then the Madeira and the Osu at the end. But maybe, I don't know. Depends. Did you eat something? Because if you ate something, then also that might change it. It's difficult because they are so different. And I think alcohol wise, some of them they just clash a little bit sometimes. So you do need to have a little bit of water in between. Carissa says some new favorites. Carissa, what was your favorite then?
So I really like the Marsala. Like I've never had it before, so it was just quite a new experience, and I absolutely love cheese. So I felt like it would pair really well. And I see that Maggie's answered my question about what to pair with it, which looks like blue cheese and Parmesan. So that was probably my favorite of the whole night.
Nice. I'm very happy that you discovered something new that you love. Very good. I'm sorry I didn't follow the chat, but you have been very active. Now I'm just going back and forth. Very good. Yes, I can share my slides. Absolutely. Happy to do so. Maggie, I can send it over to you tonight, and you can spread the love. That's what I've just seen on the chat quickly. You know, it's always like you go through the chat to find a question, and you want to do it so quickly and fast that you forgot to really read them. You just see them, but you not really read them. Barolo Boys, yes, watch Barolo Boys. Yes, it was very musty, the Fino, I agree. Maggie, you have been really my right hand throughout this tasting. I can see you've been like,
well, there was a lot, there was so much good information. I mean, for me, the two big revelations were the white Marsala, which, as I said, I've never come across that, and the Greek Vinsanto, same thing. I've never tried a Greek Vinsanto. I always associate Vinsanto with Italy. So, you know, this is what's so much fun. But if you look at the color of,
Maggie, if you look at the color of Vinsanto from Italy, don't you agree it might be much lighter? And, you know, Vinsanto is much darker. And if you look at the flavor profiles, didn't you find it's much more raisin and chocolatey in style than Vinsanto?
Which is so amazing. I would not have expected that from Greece. From Greece, I would have expected, you know, something lighter style, maybe higher acidity because of what you were saying, the wind and the elevation, etc. I mean, the Vinsanto in Italy is made in lower elevations, and it's just, this is what's so much fun about wine, is every time you think you're on top of something, you find something new.
Well, if I'm honest with you, all of you, if you listen, Maggie could have done this tasting for you instead of me, without me, because her knowledge is pretty amazing in wine, like really hands down, amazing knowledge, amazing person to say.
I just like to drink it.
Well, you're very good at it. You've got a good talent. And I've seen somebody, Josie says, we love the Madeira. Yes, Josie. Perfect. I think Madeira is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Maggie made a great comment. This Greek Vinsanto is very, very dark and, as you say, like rich in kind of roasted tones. Why is that different from the Tuscan lighter? Because it's the Tuscan is, as Maggie says, it's very much like the Tokay. It's going to be a much lighter, much more golden colored. Why is that so different in Greece?
It's dried under the sun for days. It's raisinated under the sun, under the heat. It just turns the grapes into much darker color. So you get much, much more dried fruit, dried nuts, and not nuts, but dried aromatics to it. While in Vinsanto, they are, I don't have a picture of it sadly, but they are in lofts, in shades.
Okay.
So it's a very different drying process. You have a very big of a heat very quickly, and you have a very slow warming effect. So it just produces much more gentle fruit aromatics to much bigger, bolder aromatics. And if you try Argios, is 20, 30 years old Vinsanto, it's like you cannot see through the color. And it's almost like syrup. It's crazy, but it's beautiful. Now that I'm smelling it, it has this aromatic, a minty eucalyptus aromatic to it. It smells almost like a Barossa Shiraz.
I didn't
Don't
know
you?
this grape was, produced in Greece at all.
And Josie or somebody was smiling when I said Barossa Shiraz. Don't you agree? Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, totally.
It smells like Barossa Shiraz. It's crazy. Now it smells like mint and eucalyptus, and very heavy plummy aromatics are coming through. Wow. If it was a blind tasting and I smelled it, I wouldn't have said it's a very alcoholic Australian Shiraz without tasting it, because it smells like, and you smell the alcohol.
Can we ask you a question about the Marsala? Because I
course.
remember you said that it's difficult to produce. It's very difficult to produce. So can you tell us why then it's not incredibly expensive if it's difficult to make?
Honestly, I was trying to figure it out. I actually made I'm like 6 pages of notes in Marsala, because it's not something I drink very often. They say it's very difficult to produce, but I found it on the Marsala site, so they might be just hyping up their juice. But if I'm honest with you, I don't think it's very difficult to make. It's just a fortified wine. You don't really have much to it that you have to add. I guess it just comes to its rarity. But why is it not too expensive? It's not known. It's just not known, and it's just much cheaper. Imagine to try to sell a product as a price of an aged Madeira that has already hundreds of years of history and marketing behind it, and then you come out and be like, try my Marsala for the same price, but you know nothing about me. I guess it's just much harder to sell, and that's why bringing a new grape variety, new region to the market for a high level of prices can be difficult. I think that's number one. Number two, they say it's difficult to make. I don't see that it's more difficult to make than any other 45 wine out there. I think actually Madeira is one of Osu grapes first are the most expensive to make, and then probably Madeira. Just because imagine if you have to pay a storage fee for 100 years time for one barrel in some places, how much would it be? So holding back 6 million liters of stock, that's very expensive. So I think this is not the most expensive or difficult wine to make out of the 6. I think it's just something that I don't know why I put there. I guess I just read it like I said on the Marsala site. But I don't think it's more difficult to make. It's just the rarity of it. It's less known. It doesn't come out of the country as much as we thought. There's only a couple of producers everybody talks about, including Bartoli and maybe 1 or 2. So it's just not something people talk about, I think. But I can do a bit more search on it, but that's my personal idea behind it.
I was just going to say that I think part of it is down to marketing. They're just not that organized, and Bartoli is a family farm, and it's a tiny little place, and the casks are in the kitchen of their house. So it's more
Exactly.
a love of, I mean, I can't say it's just a love of production. They've been producing it for years and years and years, and it's their livelihood. But I don't know, there are a lot of wines that are amazing that are just not that well known. And I think sweet wine in general is not super popular. I mean, there's a lot of people who know about Sauterne and Tokai especially, and that can be quite pricey. But in general, sweet wines, I think, I mean, your song, are they easy to sell at the ends of a meal? Like,
No.
Not a lot of people order them.
No, but if you think about it, 50, 60, 80 years ago, most of the wines that you could buy was fortified wine. Australia, up until 30 years ago, was just made only fortified wine. So fortified wine was a big thing 30, 40 years ago, I believe. And it just shifted into everybody wanted a much lighter, easier to drink style of wines. And people who grew up in that culture just didn't get opposed to sweet wines and fortified wines. But I think that's why it's important to educate people on fortified and sweet wines, because yes, you might don't want to have a bottle of Madeira with dinner, but you can have a glass and you can put it back to wherever you want to put it back for another 15,000 years, and then it's going to be okay. So you don't have to have a bottle of these fortified wines now you have a few months time to drink it. But I think people are afraid to buy a bottle because they have a feeling that they have to have a bottle, because if you open a bottle of Chablis in 5 days time, you're going to be like, ooh, it's gone. So I guess that might be the thing. Also, I think my job and our sommelier job, it's to educate, to teach that these fortified wines can even go with food. So it's okay to have food with fortified wines, and not just cheese. And also, the world is changing. It's just what is more fancy, I guess. And again, like Maggie said, maybe Sauternes and Asso is well known, but they are very expensive. And it's because of the winemaking, and it's not because they put so much profit on it. There's actually a very little margin they make, the wineries, but it's just such an expensive wine to make, and not every year you get botrytis. So it's not like every year you're going to get the same amount of sweet wine made. Some years you have zero botrytis, and then you have no sweet wine to sell for a year. So I guess we just have to understand that if you buy a bottle of Asso, if you buy a bottle of Sauternes, if you buy a bottle of rarely made wine, it's just something very special, and you kind of just have to look at it that way, not as a let's have a bottle of wine in 20 minutes with my friends before the party starts. Let's have this bottle of wine and make a nice environment to it, make a foie gras or some nice cheese or whatever, and make a nice celebration. And I think it's just the matter of time, the matter of who you share it with, and the occasion. And because it's Christmas time, it's definitely time to have sweet and fortified wines, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah, I know it's tier 4, but hopefully you can get to go and get some sweet and dessert wines or fortified wines before celebration starts and occurs. And then you can tell all about your one household family what you learned today. And, and then eventually you can tell the wider family than what you learned today. And you can impress them and be like, wow, I didn't know mom and dad knows about it, or my sissy or my brother. So maybe that would be my final word, Maggie. So if you would like to stay on the line with your team and your friends, you can. I can make you a host, and you can stay and I don't know, chit chat. Even though I kept you much longer.
Thank you so much, Soph. Really, really appreciate it, and thanks for picking out some of these amazing wines and introducing me to some new ones. And hopefully, see you in person. Have a great Christmas.
Thank you so much, and all of you, Merry Christmas. Maggie, I send you over the PowerPoint shortly, maybe tomorrow, because I'm not going to eat.
Yeah, no, take your time, and I'll distribute.
And if anybody would like to email me, Maggie has my email address. Feel free to ask me questions, anything really. I've been to Waitrose and I've seen this. What should I buy? I'm happy to help you out with anything. And Maggie, you're the host.
Okay.
So you can lead this. I give you the torch, and then have fun and have a lovely night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking extra time with us as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So how does everybody feel? Does anyone have any more questions?
Feel better educated.
I think you're right when you were saying that most people tend to stay away from sweet wines. I know I do. I stay away from dessert wines, and today was a real eye-opener for me. I really enjoyed some of them. So we're going to make a mental note to have some of them again.
And as Zsofi and I were picking out the wines for tonight, I was thinking, oh, there's so many other styles you could also introduce. So yeah, maybe we'll do a whole different set next time. But yeah, I think people's drinking habits have just changed in general. I know people used to drink a lot more. They used to drink spirits throughout a whole meal. There are old menus that have people drinking sherry and whiskey with their regular courses of a meal. And I know that I think of drinking still wine or maybe even some champagne throughout a meal, but I almost would never think of drinking port or whiskey or something really alcoholic.
Absolutely. I feel like the perception of dessert wines is that, or sweet wines or fortified wines, is that they're more of a treat at the end of a meal if you can get there.
Exactly. And if you're there and you're thinking, oh, should I have wine or dessert? Well, I mean, usually it's dessert.
People will go for the chocolate mousse over the Sauternes, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So what are you guys doing for the holidays? Margot, are you in Boston?
I'm in Connecticut.
Connecticut.
With my parents. I mean, we've got, I don't know, maybe half a foot of snow outside.
Oh, how nice.
Lucky you got away before all the flights got cancelled.
Oh my goodness.
This was a great festive collection for a festive season. I mean, this was ideal. I'm not thinking of this as dessert. I'm thinking of this as,
I'm so glad you liked it. It's hard to, I don't know. I have a sweet tooth, and I've learned over time that some of these wines that are considered sweet are not always sweet, but it's a hard sell. So I'm glad that you enjoyed them.
I really enjoyed it. It's really eye-opening for me. Now, my favorite Chinese alcohol is Mao Tai. Probably all know about it. The Medora really reminds me of Mao Tai, but sweeter flavor. It's really broadening my exposure to different kinds of drinks. I
think that there was just an auction of Mao Tai.
Really?
So there's a few auction houses that have particularly good wine departments. One is Sotheby's, one is Christie's, Bonham's has a decent one. And I think one of them just had an auction that included Mao Tai.
Really? Oh, wow.
Let's see if I can find the information from it.
Right. Yeah, because in mainland China, 90% of the Mao Tai in the market are fake. So
that's very interesting.
Extremely careful, but I'm sure the auction houses have the real ones.
When you say fake, do you mean some other kind of wine that has a label on it that says it's Mao Tai, but what's in the bottle is not Mao Tai?
Tastes similar. So I visited the manufacturer of Mao Tai. They are at the bottom of a mountain, and it's just the water from that mountain. It's so special that the output capacity from that manufacturer, it's so limited. And when you look at the Mao Tai available in the market, it's like multiple times of the capacity of the manufacturer.
It's the same with Old Sauternes, though. Sauternes is one of the more successful of the sweet wines. When you say there's a brand, like a brand, it's not really a brand because it's made by lots of different people, but there's a lot more, say, I don't know, 1961 Sauternes on the market than they produced.
Yeah.
Same idea.
Yeah. You just need to be more careful. I really love this event. Thank you so much, Maggie.
Oh, my pleasure. It was very easy to organize. And for any of you who were waiting until the last minute for your parcels and biting your nails, I'm really sorry about that. But I'm glad it all worked out in the end.
I can't thank you enough, Maggie. You've cheered us up twice now during 2 major lockdowns. We're very grateful.
My pleasure.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Merry
thanks,
Christmas,
Maggie. It was
everyone.
great.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas, everyone. Enjoy and safe travels.
Thanks so much. It was great.
Thank you.
And feel free to email me if you have any questions or want to know anything further, but I will post the presentation and also send the link to the recording of this.
Okay, great. Thank you so
Fabulous.
much.
Fabulous.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Peace.